Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue, joined as always on a Thursday by Daniel Gallon and Mark Brennan, my colleagues over at lions247.com. If you're watching on YouTube, Mark's outside. It's a beautiful day here in Happy Valley. These guys are hitting the road on Friday. They're actually hitting the skies off to Los Angeles, Pasadena specifically, and the Rose Bowl. We were all there together a few years back. A little bit of a different setting this time around for a UCLA home game. But the first time Penn State plays a Big Ten matchup in the Rose Bowl in the regular season. New territory for us, a good excuse to get out into some sunshine out there in Southern California for these guys, hopefully. We got a lot to discuss on this episode of the podcast. Number 7 Penn State visiting winless UCLA. It's a 3:30 kickoff here, 12:30 kickoff local time. Lions are favored by 25.5 points. We'll give you our predictions later, let you know where we land on that betting margin. We broke down UCLA in detail with Bruins reporter Mike Regalado from within our 24/7 Sports Network on our last episode of this show, which dropped on Wednesday. That episode was also paired with Tyler Calvaruso, giving us a ton of feedback from Penn State's big whiteout recruiting event. More than 200 prospects were in Beaver Stadium on Saturday night at some flip targets as well. If you missed any of that conversation, learn more about UCLA, learn more about Nittany Lions recruiting from that Wednesday episode. We're going to keep things rolling forward here, and we've got to get into some unfortunate news for Penn State. They're trying to bounce back from this painful loss to Oregon, and now, Daniel, they've got to work their way through an injury situation. They were relatively healthy through non-conference action, even coming out of the Oregon game, but this week on the field, Tony Rojas goes down, and he is out long-term with an unspecified injury. This is a big situation because he was clearly an on-the-rise defender as a second-year starter.
Yeah, it's really tough news for Penn State. We got out to the practice field on Wednesday, didn't see Tony Rojas out there. Right after we got off the practice field, Blue White Illustrated was first to report Rojas had a long-term injury. We were able to confirm it right away. And it's one of those areas on the team where we talked about that, depth was maybe a question mark. I think these past couple of years, whenever Penn State has had a question mark in terms of depth at a position, they've been able to navigate through and not really be forced to rely on that depth for any significant length of time. And that's obviously going to change right now at linebacker. It's tough for Rojas, first of all. He was someone that we know was playing through something last year, had to get something cleaned up during the offseason. By all accounts, was healthy, active, ready to go coming into this year. I think we saw that on display a little bit early on. It looked like that he was really taking a step in his junior year. So on the personal note, really tough for him. And then for Penn State as a team, Rojas had played the third most snaps of any defender behind linebacker Amari Campbell and cornerback AJ Harris. And when you take someone like that off the field, it changes things. Dom DeLuca is the next man up. But then after that, that's really, really where we get into some of the question marks, I think.
Yeah, we're going to dive into the replacement move here. But, Mark, what is Penn State losing? What are the Nittany Lions losing for the foreseeable future here? It's an unspecified timeline. What was Tony Rojas giving them?
An every down player. I mean, he was good. We saw last year, obviously, what he was able to do, in the playoff, intercepting a pass and taking it back for a touchdown at Beaver Stadium, and just improving as against the run. So Dom DeLuca is a veteran player. They're fortunate to have him, but he's never been that every down player. So now he's going to get the opportunity to step up and do that. But it's also going to force some of these younger players who they were able to bring along kind of slowly. Now that's not an option. I mean, Keon Wiley, they're going to have to find out what he's able to do. And, James Franklin talking about a couple of Specca is a guy that we've talked about, and then a couple of the freshmen in Tatch and Cam Smith. There's so many Cams on this team that I don't want to you guys know me, like with the Xaviers, I have a way of getting them mixed up. But yeah, I mean, they're going to need young players to step up and step up quickly. I think they're fortunate that the first game that you're not going to have them is going to be against what ought to be an overmatched opponent, and you should have a couple of weeks here to work people in. But there's no way of painting this as anything other than a serious blow for the Penn State defense. I mean, one of your best all-around players over there on defense, and again, an every down player.
Yeah, difficult news for Tony Rojas, obviously, to digest. Your heart goes out to him. He's a guy who was really cruising in the right direction, been very promising since he showed up on campus in 2023. And it occurred to me last night that he can still take a red shirt this season if they end up going that route. They've only played 4 games. He did not redshirt as a freshman. So we'll see what's next for Tony Rojas. When it's appropriate to talk about him coming back, we'll talk about that. But right now, you mentioned Dom DeLuca, almost 1,000 career defensive snaps going back to 2022. Fortunate to have a guy like that, a 3-time team captain, not quite the athletic specimen that Tony Rojas was, one of the best athletes on this roster. That sideline to sideline speed really stands out. But Daniel, digging a little bit deeper, and James Franklin brought up these 2 names, and overnight and into Thursday morning, we were able to speak with some sources on the Penn State side of things about these guys. Alex Tash, who got into 1 game, the Villanova matchup, about 20 snaps. He had 3 tackles, one of them for loss against the Wildcats that afternoon. And then Cam Smith, as Mark mentioned, came to campus in May. Tash was around back last winter, so he had all of spring ball. Smith and LeVar Arrington II were the 2 who came to campus after him. And we have quickly learned that Cam Smith has gone from a relative afterthought in our minds to someone who may be pushing to burn red shirt. What we got in terms of feedback on Smith is that he's a pretty good match for Rojas in terms of the athletic replacement. A guy who can do a lot of those same things, although they really would like him to be further along in the strength department, having to step up to a larger role. It's no fault of his own, but he got here in May. You're in the season now. It's not really the time to build a bunch of mass. And there's a thought that next year he's going to be in a different spot, right around 215, I think, right now at 6 foot. Tash is about 230 at 6'2". And the feedback on him from Inside Lash is he has really been able to go downhill with some authority. And they felt like that popped on film in high school, but he had a history of shoulder issues, shoulder injuries coming to campus. And so he has held up well through spring ball, through preseason camp, through some physical practices and some game action. And so things seem to be trending in the right direction there. You knock on wood a little bit with any kind of injury history. But Daniel, what do you make of these 2 guys getting their shot? James Franklin certainly indicated that either one of them could pop up in Pasadena with some extended playing time. This is kind of new territory for the defense, going from talking about these guys as these developing pieces behind the curtain to now maybe needing to help you prepare to win against Ohio State on November 1st.
Yeah, well, during the bye week, that was kind of our Alex Tash week, where we had Jim Knowles. I think we had Dan Connor the week before, and he was someone who just kept coming up unprompted a little bit. That he would get his name would get sprinkled into these answers. You'd ask an open-ended question, and he would be the answer for it. Cam Smith wasn't someone who was coming up in those conversations, but on Wednesday evening at practice, and I think Tyler, you said last week too. He's out there in his varsity number 26 with the linebackers going through drills. And that's not necessarily something that we saw earlier in the season. Alex Tash is still in a scout team jersey. So I think that that's something you can look at a little bit that shows that, okay, there is some trust in Smith. There is something that, could be useful with him. Franklin said that he's been, showing up in the Sunday scrimmages where the guys who don't get the chance to play on Saturday, a lot of the developmental squad guys, they get to go out on the field and show what they can do. Like you said, the physical part of it is really interesting. Cam Smith is listed at 6 foot 216. Like you said, Alex Tash 6'2", 230. Tony Rojas was 6'2", 230. 2 bigger guys at the linebacker spot, and you couple that also with Amari Campbell being a little bit undersized as a linebacker too, also at 6 foot 230. So it will be interesting to see how it fits together. Franklin said that both Tash and Smith are green light candidates at this point, and that is a conversation given the situation there. I think he also remarked that they'd like to preserve their red shirts. So the thing that popped into my head when I heard that is what we saw last year with the freshman running backs, Quentin Martin and Corey Smith, where you saw them essentially used as one person, where instead of 4 games with one person, they had 8 games with 2 people, and they were able to utilize their reps that way. I think that might be an option there, but we'll see. I mean, we'll get our first travel roster of the year. That's always illuminating when we get to these road games, especially in Big Ten play. And they'll give us a little bit of a insight, I think, into what this depth chart looks like.
You make a good point. I think Penn State they're probably on of two minds on this, where they'd love to preserve those red shirts, but they'd also love for at least one of these guys to show they're good enough and ready enough where you can play them consistently. Because I just don't see them going 70 snaps in Don DeLuca's basket. He's started 5 games last year. He's got a lot of experience. When they went from a 3 linebacker set last year to a 2 linebacker set at times, he was typically the linebacker who came off the field. They're pretty much exclusively in 2 linebacker sets at this point. And when you look back at what they did against Oregon, and so far that's certainly our most definitive look at what their rotational plans are so far. Campbell and Rojas both at 70 plus snaps. DeLuca next up at 17 snaps. So that's a huge gap. We'll find out a lot more. Just to go back to some of the other names that Mark mentioned, because it's worth noting. Anthony Specca, he's focused in at the Mike position. A lot of this conversation has been at the Will position. So Specca, we think, is still really focused in on the Mike. Keon Wiley, 10 plus snaps in all those non-conference games. Didn't play defense against Oregon. Tough to tell where he is, especially when James Franklin doesn't directly bring up his name when asked about what happens next. And then Takari Nelson, who transitioned from safety to linebacker last year, has kind of become a forgotten man, at least from our viewpoint, on the defensive side of the ball. He's been a special teams contributor, but really haven't seen him pop up with defensive roles in a while now. So that's kind of where it stands. Mark, did you have something to add? I saw you moving.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that LeVar the second is transitioning to a box linebacker, and during the bye week, I think we heard some about that. How I think he was more of a pass rusher in high school, and they're making him so. That may be one of the reasons why his name's not being in there. That is not necessarily the easiest transition to go from somebody who's getting after the passer to being in that box and perhaps calling plays. It's a little bit different. So people are wondering what's up with LeVar II. It's nothing. Different freshmen come along at different ways. And if you're moving to a little bit of a different role, a different position, sometimes other guys might be a little bit ahead of you.
2 other items I just wanted to quickly bring up from James Franklin. King Mack has established a gap, according to James Franklin, in that competition at safety. If it wasn't clear against Oregon when he played 80 snaps alongside Zakee Wheatley and Dejon Lane, and Antoine Belgrave-Shorter were relegated to only special teams duties. Clearly, King Mack has taken control of that situation, which is startling since he didn't start the first 2 matchups. And then Penn State still sees 7 quote-unquote starters on the offensive line. That's coming off an Oregon game in which TJ Shanahan saw 4 total snaps on offense. Cooper Cousins saw 2 total snaps on offense. So it felt like they really invested in that initial 5 for the duration of the Oregon game, aside from a few plays where Donka had to come to the sideline for a brief injury. But Franklin says still see 7 starters out there. We'll see what the rotational usage might look like out at UCLA. Let's jump into matchup storylines. And I think we've got to begin with kind of what we discussed coming out of last weekend on our Monday podcast. Where is this program psychologically, from the head coach down to the players across the field in Pasadena? How are they responding to what was a pretty painful loss, one that has gotten them a lot of flack nationally, locally? A lot of these guys are talking about shutting down their social media access this week to try to avoid some of it. Even Zariah Fisher mentioned he's getting some of it from family. So these guys have it coming from all directions. Daniel, what will you be watching most closely when you get settled in at the Rose Bowl and see this team get a chance to play another game?
I mean, it's going to be, what does that first quarter look like? I think that that is going to be something that can really spike the anxiety of the fan base, or maybe soothe some of those fears. You've seen the stat going around that UCLA hasn't led in a game this year. I think that the sentiment on our message board from some people is that might change this Saturday, given where Penn State has been. But I think that that's what you want to see, is that, like, what does Penn State look like early? Is there any lingering effects from last week? Are there any effects from the cross-country travel? All the different factors that go into it. I mean, a potentially sleepy environment. We know that there's going to be students there, that UCLA has started classes finally. But we've seen plenty of pictures of what that stadium can look like over the course of a year for UCLA games. So we'll see what it looks like. But yeah, I think early on, it's just going to be, what does this start look like? Because we've heard a ton about starting fast over the past week, and it's not something we've really seen so far this year.
If you forecast this and how Penn State wants it to go and how the betting spread goes, you'd like to see a ring of Penn State fans around the main area, around the field in that first, second, third row, because they moved up. All the UCLA fans moved out, and they're kind of taking over, chanting, "We are," giving some high fives to the players perhaps. James Franklin was not very shy about saying it's a good time to get out of town, Mark. You've covered your fair share of kind of rough Penn State losses where it could bubble over, it could seep into a second loss. What is your kind of attention on this Penn State squad as they go out to Southern California?
Yeah, I didn't love his body language on Wednesday. I mean, it was kind of standoffish. We can only comment on the windows into the program that we get, and that's our limited access, which I'm not complaining about. But, for his one availability during the course of the week after the Monday one, obviously, and the last availability leading up to the game, to be kind of there, I can't do it with my microphone here, but with his arms kind of crossed and, I'm playing amateur psychologist here, psychiatrist, whatever it is. It just didn't seem like great body language. So, yeah, I mean, maybe it is a good time for him to get out of town, but I don't know. I mean, listen, we've talked about it. This is pro sports, right? Fans are going to get after you. Now, if people are going above and beyond what happened in the stadium with the boos and whatnot, that's wrong. That's uncalled for. I mean, if there's stuff happening behind the scenes that we don't know about, that's uncalled for. But on game day, I think it's fine. But to get to your question, I didn't want to let that go because people were talking about it on the board, and I think it was noticeable, and I think it's a fair comment. He's usually much more affable in those situations, and I'm not asking for somebody to be affable after a tough loss, but to be kind of, I don't know. It just struck me if people could watch the video and for themselves. So I think, energy from him, energy from the players. Daniel mentioned it. It's going to be a dead atmosphere. I don't care if the student, how many students are going to bus from Englewood or wherever it is all the way to Pasadena on a Saturday afternoon.
They might go to the beach instead. Yeah, might go to the beach instead.
Like you're in LA, you're really going to do that? So I think they have to bring their own energy, and I think that's going to be key. And they've been good at that. They've been good at compartmentalizing, if I can spit it out, after, okay, here's your loss, and you're not going to let another team beat you twice. I know it's a cliche, but he's been very good at that the last couple of years. So maybe him taking this no-nonsense, arms folded approach is what works for him and what works for them. But to me, I'm looking for energy. What are they going to have on the sideline? What are they going to have out on the field? We know guys like Dennis Sutton are always going to bring that energy, but what about everybody else? How about seeing some more energy from that offensive line? How about seeing some more emotion from that offensive line? How about seeing some more energy from Nick Singleton? We see it from Katron Allen. Maybe that's not what Nick Singleton's all about, but maybe now's the time you need it. And how about seeing some more positive energy from a guy like Drew Aller, rather than when mistakes are made, the bad body language going over to the sideline. So to me, yeah, it's going to be what's on the field obviously matters the most, and how they execute is obviously very important. But I think at this point, coming off a tough loss, energy, enthusiasm, I think all those things are important.
Yeah, beyond James Franklin, the guy you mentioned last there, Drew Aller, to me is the one that you watch for the most here, because it's not just the offense looking in his direction, the 10 other guys on the field. That defense wants to know what he's all about in this particular Saturday as they're going off and on the field and probably bullying UCLA based on what we know about the Bruins thus far. And Drew Aller told us last offseason, we've recanted this a few times, or we talked about this a few times. He said he wanted to be the thermostat, the one who sets the temperature on the field, the one who sets the temperature for this team, rather than someone who's reacting to the temperature around him. And I think that's kind of failed thus far based on what we've witnessed in the last few games. Certainly the Oregon loss, there was a late rally where he and the offense found something. But Daniel, QB1 this week, I think you just want to see him back in command, which is a word that we described him as several times coming off the Nevada matchup when he completed 85% of his passes. But that's kind of been the outlier thus far for his performances.
Yeah, I think that ties into what I was talking about in terms of how they start. James Franklin talked about that a little bit last night, where he said that some players, they get, a couple completions, then they start to feel good. Other quarterbacks, it's maybe they got to get hit once or twice, and then they start getting in the flow of the game. He said that Aller can do both, which, I think that it's kind of a middle ground answer in terms of, hey, we got to figure out what's going to get this guy going. Like, it has to be something. So I want to see what he
something's
looks like.
going to work.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, I think that, the offense is a little bit different if he is using his legs, keeping things going. I know he had a couple key runs in that fourth quarter when they were making a run. But I mean, I think that, people just want to see him complete passes. They want to see him complete the easy ones. They don't want to see a pass behind Luke Reynolds when there's some space in front of him going up the seam. They want him to see him hit Nick Singleton in the flat on what is seen to be an easy pass. So I think that you're going to be looking at Drew Aller in that first quarter. Can he finish the quarter like 5 of 7 for 40 some yards or 50 some yards? Like, can you just see something like that where you're like, okay, like we've got the building blocks moving forward through the air, and that Aller is someone that we can really embrace and lean on as we move forward.
I think, unfortunately, you're right. Drew has kind of earned the reputation of what you see early is probably what you're going to get for most of the game. Now, again, that last 10 minutes of the Oregon matchup, that was a little bit different. They hadn't really had a come from behind moment in these top 10 games where the offense had lagged, but they found something there. Again, we'll see if there's any carryover effect for him, the coordinator, what have you. But boys, if they can't run the ball against these Bruins, we got big, big red flags to raise, because UCLA ranks 131st nationally in rush defense, 232 yards allowed per game. And this is where I have to remind you,
how many teams are there?
134, 131st out of 134. And
I think it's 136 now.
Oh, much better than for UCLA. Yeah, they're in a much better spot than I thought. I think, though, that the point here is UCLA has only played one Big Ten team. They've only played one Big Ten team, one Power 4 team, and they still have gotten shredded that way. And it was Northwestern, and they're giving up 230 plus yards per game. They're giving up 5.4 yards per carry. I love this marriage for Katron Allen. And again, if this doesn't knock Nick Singleton and this offensive line out of their fog right now, I'm just not sure what will, Mark.
Yeah, I also think you have to be careful with fool's gold, though, right? Because you're going to need Drew Aller to play. So I'm guessing they could probably go out there and run every single down and still dominate this game. But that's not going to help Drew Aller coming out of that Oregon game, is it? I mean, I think he's got to find some success along the way. So I agree with you. To be successful in the Big Ten, you need a really good ground game, and they have to take care of business in this game. But I also think you can't just ignore the passing game. And here's something that I would present to you. How about if you come out on your first series and don't run an end around and then a wildcat if it's important for Drew Aller to get going early, how about not putting him in a 3rd and long on the first series of the game? How about giving him some plays that he is able to maybe gain that confidence that he seems to need? So that's one of the things that I would definitely be looking for. I agree with you, though. I mean, if they can't run against this team, it's definitely important to get the ground game going and get confidence for the offensive line. But I don't think you could completely ignore the passing game, because they are going to need Drew Aller this season to make tough throws.
Daniel, anything else to add on the ground game, the offense, before we switch it up and talk about some defensive storylines here?
No, I mean, I think that you are really looking at that offensive line to see if they can get some push, how they can really get things going moving forward.
Well, let's talk about UCLA and their offense, which is suddenly under new direction. Offensive coordinator change this week. They had a defensive coordinator change early in the season, along with a head coaching change. And it's basically like a staff that is trying to get through the season, I'd imagine, in the most, I guess, without things going completely off the rails. And there's people at UCLA who are fearing they could go winless on the entire season, the way things have started. And it has not been the scenario that I'd imagine their quarterback envisioned when he left an SEC playoff competitor to head out near his home and play for UCLA. And Nico, I am man, Daniel, I know you had
Let Daniel do it.
Daniel, you're much better at these.
I think Iamaleva.
Hold on. I got it. Hold on, I got it. Ia Maleava, and that's why I think the UCLA roster, for actually having the audio on their roster, I should have gone to that before I brought him up. I was just able to go there, click it, and it's him saying his own name. So maybe Penn State can take note with some of their tougher names on the roster. But we'll call him Nico. We'll call him Nico for the rest of the podcast. He has been their primary weapon as a passer, as a runner. He leads the team in rushing yards with 205 of them. He leads the team in rush attempts. That's when you even take the sacks out of the equation. And he has a 30-plus yard run in 2 games. He has a 20-plus yard run in 3 of the 4 contests. And we've heard players say, yeah, we respect that. But, man, speaking of these defenders, you don't get the sense they view UCLA's offense as much of a challenge. They have respect for what they have at quarterback. But Mark, this really should be a suffocating performance for the Penn State defense, unless they're going to pull a rabbit out of their hat with this offensive coordinator change and revolutionize the sport.
I think the reason Oregon was so good is because Moore played so well, and then their running game was better than I knew it was good, but that freshman I think was just even way better than I thought. And that's the problem for UCLA is when you're one-dimensional, and that one-dimensional is one person. So yeah, he's two-dimensional, but if you know that the one thing you have to do is stop Nico, I think this defense is really, 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 really equipped to do that. So they should be in good shape even without Tony Rojas. I think I'm not sure what UCLA would be able to do because I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball other than the quarterback. And I think it's a difficult situation where you have one guy that you could have Jim Knowles focus on, knowing that if you stop him, you're going to stop that offense. And I think that's been borne out, right, by the games they've played, even against opponents who aren't very good. They've really had trouble scoring. I mean, against Northwestern, they had, 14? And Northwestern's really struggling this year. And that was actually an improvement from some of their previous games.
Anthony Woods done a fine job of running back. He hasn't had a lot of touches, but he's at about 5 yards per carry. He has 13 catches out of the backfield as well. I think UCLA really likes what they have in wide receiver Quasi Gilmore, 225 yards on 19 catches, 6 more catches than anyone on the team, 9 more catches than any other wide receiver. But Daniel, just comes down to it where they don't have the offensive line to support this quarterback talent. They don't necessarily have the playmakers for him to distribute the ball to. And their game flow has been so awful, it's hard to tell what their offensive plan would even be. Now you switch in another play caller. It just feels like this is absolutely ripe for the picking for a defense and a coordinator who I'd imagine would like to blow off some steam after what happened late Saturday night in Beaver Stadium.
I think when you talk about our meeting with James Franklin on Wednesday night, I thought it was really interesting when he got asked, straight up, like, have you ever had to prepare for anything like this in terms of turnover? And he was just like, no, like it's a little bit of, I think, untrod territory for them. But I think when you look at it, I mean, I think it all goes back to Nico. I mean, I think that when, thinking about game flow, how things could look, the one way that I see UCLA at least being able to threaten a little bit is, okay, maybe you get a decent return on a punt or a kickoff. Then there's a couple breakdowns. He's able to scramble into field goal range. I think that those are kind of maybe the weaknesses that I look at. You couple a running quarterback with losing Rojas. I think that that's a interesting dynamic there. That one of your faster, more athletic guys at the second level, who ostensibly would have eyes on the backfield, you take him out of the mix. That might change things a little bit. But I think that Knowles and this defense are going to be in a good position to really lock things down and have a strong outing against this UCLA team.
We're a bit wary, as we've said, about maybe some sleepwalking from the offense entering this game, but I don't think we feel that way about the defense. And I feel better about the defense after hearing from several defenders over the course of the week about Jim Knowles' approach in the film review, their first time to review a loss and with Jim Knowles, and kind of how they feel about themselves coming out of it. We actually heard from a couple guys. Xavier Gilliam was probably the most on the record about it and saying he feels like they're a closer unit coming out of that experience. And so we'll see if that shows up against a really troubled UCLA offensive attack. Guys, let's jump into our Penn State players to watch now before we get to our score predictions. And we'll begin with you, Daniel.
Yeah, I think we've touched on most of the key figures in depth. So, I'm going to go with AJ Harris. I think that Quasi Gilmore, Mikey Matthews, the two UCLA wide receivers, are pretty decent players. They're two guys that I remember hearing their names as recruits and reading things about them along those lines. And I think that this will be a chance for us to see AJ Harris look like the first rounder that I think a lot of us think he is. I didn't get a chance to look at his advanced stats on PFF from the game last week, but there were a couple, I think, unfortunate bounces for him. Decorian Moore was able to make a couple big plays. So I'd look at AJ Harris as someone to watch in a bounce back spot for him and the rest of the defense.
I can give you those stats real quick because they were part of my snap breakdown and player notes piece earlier this week. Harris, he had They tagged him for allowing 5 receptions for 53 total yards. I believe that was on 6 or 7 targets. So he got some work. He didn't get any work in non-conference play. So if there was rust there, he shook it off. And obviously going against the high-octane Oregon team, there's no room for rust. So we'll learn a little bit more about A.J. Harris perhaps in this UCLA matchup, or they just won't be able to get the ball down the field and we'll have to wait another week. We'll find that out. Mark, where are you landing with your player to watch?
I was kind of avoiding a B here, so excuse me. I'm going to go with Vega Ioane. I mean, he's a guy last year who had one of the great blocks we've ever seen. And we actually put it as the main photo for our predictions here. And preseason All-American, people project him as a first-round draft pick, but I'm picking him more as somebody who's personifying or representing the entire offensive line. So kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, Tyler, I think he has to dominate. I think the offensive line has to dominate. So I'm going to be keeping my eyes on them. And, it's not always easy to see when an offensive lineman is dominating, but if he's that first-round pick, if he's that All-American, I want to see him just kicking what and taking names in this game the way he did against UCLA last year.
I'm going to go with someone who's heading back home, and that's Kyron Hudson at wide receiver. Obviously a USC transfer, but that is his neck of the woods, Southern California. I'd imagine he's going to have a few extra fans or family in attendance at this one, and I think he has left some things to be desired of late. After a strong start, he was a really buzzy name among the preseason conversations. Felt like he was, ascending among that trio at the transfer spot, but it really has been Trevor Pena as a runner, as a receiver, and Devontae Ross, who has 3 touchdowns, 2 more than anybody else on the team, who have stepped up more so at transfer. I think Hudson was targeted 4 times against Oregon. All of those passes went incomplete. One of them was a drop on his end. He had 11 catches the first 2 games, 3 combined catches the last 2 matchups, Villanova included. And so I think you want to see Hudson take a step forward as that perimeter threat. You want to see that trust that we heard so much that was established between Drew Aller and Kyron Hudson show up against a Big Ten opponent. And I think his blocking has even left a little bit to be desired coming off of that Oregon game. So would love to see him back home, a guy who's, his games are numbered here as a senior as well. Maximize this opportunity. He led the receiver group with 48 snaps against Oregon. But again, when you kind of no-show in the box score, you have a drop, you want to see more out of Kyron Hudson. You brought him here for a reason. There was a lot of excitement about him. So I think you want to get him on track, and there's an opportunity to do that this Saturday. Let's jump into our predictions now, and we'll get going with you, Mark.
I'm going low. I think Penn State races out to a 28-0 lead and is kind of cruising in the fourth quarter, and maybe the defense gets a little tired. All those guys played so many snaps. All the starters played so many snaps last week. You're adding in travel. They're traveling on a Thursday. We all know, having done it, that East Coast to West Coast travel seems to be a little trickier than the other way. So I think we're going to get another bad beat, another late cover, and it's going to be 28-10 Penn State. Relatively easy win, but I'm just not confident enough in that offense. I think it's good enough that it's going to be able to win this game comfortably, but I don't think it's going to be the massive blowout some people are predicting. In terms of bold predictions, if Nick Singleton doesn't get 100 yards against this team, I'm not sure it's going to happen. So I'm going to go and say Nick finally cuts loose, and I think it would be only his second 100-yard game in the last year, dating back to, I think, September of 2024, and he's able to finally get going. I still say that if he gets 1 or 2, if he figures it out, I think it could be a good thing moving forward. You won't be able to base it solely on this game, but if he can put together, get to 100 yards in this game, and then do some good things against Northwestern, I think then you're starting to look at that 1-2 punch that everybody was expecting.
I think you really just want to get Nick Singleton sitting in a film room on a Sunday next to Stan Drayton and feeling good about what's on film. I can't imagine that's been the case through 4 matchups thus far. So that's where you want to get Nick, and then you want to build off of that. And just by the way, your forecast for this game will be pretty reminiscent of how it went last year. Penn State was up 27-3 with just seconds remaining. UCLA scored a touchdown to make it a 27-11 win. It's a victory, but it was a bit underwhelming as a 29.5-point favorite. So similar script that you see playing out at UCLA this time around. Daniel, what do you have for us?
Yeah, so our talk about slow starts coupled with the idea that Penn State doesn't necessarily let teams beat it twice recently got me thinking a little bit to look at Penn State's past couple games after losses. In 2022, after that Michigan loss, you got the Boo Birds out in the first half for Sean Clifford against Minnesota. After they lose to Ohio State, they're out at Indiana, and they had, weird weather day, patchwork offensive line. That's a 7-7 game after the first quarter. You think about that Indiana game coming off the Ohio State loss 2 years ago, where Drew Aller just had to chuck it deep for them to win. That Rutgers game after the Michigan loss, ugly football. Drew Aller gets hurt. Even last year, the 35-6 win over Washington after the loss, it's only a 7-0 game after the first quarter. So I do think that this could be a little shaky early on. I don't know if going into halftime, people necessarily feel the best about things. But I think over the course of the game, Penn State asserts itself, and then they're able to turn things over to these backups. And I think you're going to see a hungry group of second teamers out there, because these are guys that, might not have necessarily gotten as much playing time as they thought they were going to get in the non-conference. Maybe these are guys that thought they were going to be in the rotation against Oregon, but that rotation gets really tightened up and they're relegated to the sidelines. I think when we have that line change, you're going to see hungry guys out there. And I think that that'll help Penn State to really propel things forward and win this very comfortably, 44-6, really long-winded way of getting there. But in terms of a bold prediction, I think we're going to see the defense, really ramp things up coming off last week. I've got 6 sacks for that defensive line, Denied Ennis Sutton getting 2 of those, and as a bonus, an AJ Harris interception.
There you go. So we're of similar minds here. Daniel, I've got Penn State cruising to a victory. Big reason why is I do think the defense will come out motivated. I think they will take advantage of this UCLA offense over and over and over again. I wonder when UCLA will look to move in their backup quarterback, to be honest, because of the beating I think Nico may take along the way. And ultimately, I do think that we're going to see success on the ground from this offense. I mean, they churned out 240 rushing yards against Villanova. When Katron Allen ran the ball against Oregon, there was some success there as well. And so I think there's a real chance for them to go close to 300 rushing yards in this matchup, which would be kind of on point for UCLA, on par for their performance thus far in covering the run. So I'm going to go 41-6, almost exactly your same score, Daniel. And similar bold prediction, I think Penn State will rack up at least 10 tackles for loss and at least 4 sacks, which would be their season high. You gave them 6. That would, I think, double their season high to this point. But we both are agreeing it's going to be a defensive-led effort for Penn State. And I think even if the offense takes a while to find its footing, this is just a talent and I think a coaching advantage going into this one, where Penn State could be able to work through some of that kinks and still end up winning, by 25 plus points, even if we're not impressed by what the offense did. But we'll all get to kind of look at a rushing attack and we'll say, wow, they found it. But then we'll also have to be like, was it legitimate? Does this have staying power because it was against UCLA? So there we go. There's our prediction. We've all got Penn State winning. Daniel and I have them covering. And our UCLA reporter who joined us on the last episode, Mike Regalado, he gave you his prediction in case you missed it. 45-10 Penn State is what he picked. Guys, have a safe trip out on Friday to Southern California. We'll see you back here soon. And follow all of our in-game, pre-game, and post-game coverage over at lions247.com. We'll come to you with a lot coming off that game, which will end in the early afternoon out at UCLA and early evening here in Happy Valley.
Tyler, let me give a quick shout out. Could I? I know you went through all that. I'm sorry. But Playbook Mark Harrington, who does our predictions, hit the exact score on the last 2 games. That's unbelievable. I don't think I've ever seen that before. So if you want to know who's picked this week, is probably going to be right. Go look at it. And then also look at Goon's pick. He's obviously picking with his heart, but he's predicting that 2 Penn State running backs, 2 different Penn State running backs, he didn't say who, are each going to rush for 200 yards. So some fun with the predictions, but congrats to Playbook Mark Harrington, very smart guy. Picked the exact score 2 weeks in a row. I don't know that I've ever seen that before.
Well-deserved shout out. And, no one wants to see this ground game and this offensive line going more than Goon, who was a road grader for that 94 unbeaten team.
In the Rose Bowl.
And we'll see if it gets going. We'll be back with you with a post-game podcast. In the meantime, check out our coverage on the site. For Daniel and Mark, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.